Hi, welcome to Expert Talks at MAAVRUS. This is the interview series with thought leaders in the AI, analytics, and transformation space. My name is Mahadevann Iyerr, Mahaa for short. I'm your host for today. I'm the co-founder and CEO of MAAVRUS, which is a managed marketplace for on-demand analytics and business transformation services. Our guest for today is Neil Srinivasan, popularly known as Neil. Neil is the founder and managing principal of Canopus Business Management Group, through which he runs his consulting practice. Before starting Canopus, Neil was the Senior Vice President of Business Transformation and Customer Experience at HSBC. He's also held Service Excellence and Business Transformation leadership roles at Bank of America and Stanchart. Neil started his career with TVS and then Whirlpool. Neil is a BTech in production technology and MS in manufacturing management. He's a master black belt in Six Sigma. He's the author of 3 books. So Neil, wonderful to have you join us on Expert Talks at MAAVRUS.
Thanks, Maha. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you and talk about the latest trends in analytics. Absolutely.
Excellent. So maybe why don't I just talk you through your journey of how you got into Six Sigma and how Six Sigma actually helped you transition into more both the analytics and the consulting space, and also if you can lay stress on why coming from a Six Sigma background and knowing analytics, if it does give you a holistic view of business transformation and consulting.
Absolutely, yeah. Good question. So, as any engineer, I was trained to use the engineering methods. So I used to work in hardcore engineering functions like process engineering and new product development, installing capacity in the plants and stuff like that. So in the late 90s, I'm sure many of us know that the Six Sigma wave was covering almost all of the manufacturing sector, and in fact even some of the other sectors, non-manufacturing sectors, were curious about how we can apply this for improving our business performance, aligning to customers and stuff like that. So that's when I got exposed to Six Sigma when I used to work for Whirlpool. And that's also the reason why I had an opportunity to transition from the manufacturing space into the banking space. I knew nothing about banking. I don't have banking or a commerce or some kind of economics or those kind of qualifications for a bank to even consider me. But this was a good opportunity for me to move into banking space, and banks were very curious about how do we establish process, create a process orientation among employees, because largely banks traditionally are service oriented. They have a strong service mindset. And to bring in a process mindset is one, it helps in service. It also helps in driving efficiency and operations. And so that's when I migrated. And as you're aware, Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, etc., emphasizes on 2 aspects, right? One is about how do we look at everything as a process, and the second is about how do you use data or facts for decision making. And this has come a long way for me, because almost not just merely in banking or merely in manufacturing, but also from a personal standpoint in my life, and also now as a consultant for the last 13 years, whenever I'm working with any other industry which is not the industries that I've been experienced before, I only use these 2 levers or these 2 lenses to view the business, and that's largely helped me to dissect, understand what's going wrong, what's going well, etc. And so I think if I reflect back today at how the journey of analytics, I have personally got into analytics, and how I see the growth of analytics across various organizations, industries, etc. It's largely driven by the fact that we need to bring about certain change, or we need to maybe automate certain processes, etc. But the genesis for that is to understand how that process functions, how that particular decision making process functions, if you have to look at it that way, whether it's about doing a credit rating, or whether it's about deciding when you need to switch off a sensor in a industry IoT, or any other situation like fraud and crime related environment. When we use analytics, essentially it's a process and a decision making process. And if we are able to see the data that comes out of that process, then it's easy to solve that problem. So for me, I think this is how I have seen analytics, Six Sigma, and the process orientation help me in my journey.
You said you're working for clients predominantly in the B2B space, right? And you spoke of an example of an account manager, and essentially about the whole prospect to funnel to client conversion process, right? Which is an area that you spoke about. Equally in the obviously customer conversion is the key area for any business, be it B2B or B2C. For
Right.
B2C, there's the end consumer. Obviously, the volumes are high, right? The data hence is very high, and ticket size could be small, and that's a very data intensive type of business, right? In the B2B space, it'll be great to hear from you, because my own experience on B2B sales funnel analytics has been that given the level of limited level of digital exhaust, if I can say that, right, or the data capture which is digitally available, there's a lot of missing data that is available. So quantity of data is less, quality of data, given that it is predominantly captured in a manual fashion by account managers and sales people entering the data into something, is generally an issue, right? So how do you see that? Is it more of a process transformation or analytics modeling? How do you really approach that?
Yeah, I mean, see, I would partially agree with you on the statement. Over the years, see, what's happened is because of digitization, ERP, CRM, and all these applications, they've also extensively penetrated in the B2B space. So most organizations do have, now I can say most organizations do have a lot of data in the B2B space also. But the point is, are they using that data? Is it residing somewhere just dumped in the database? Yes, that's to a large extent the truth. So data is available, and there is certainly manual intervention of data capture, like even B2C. I think a lot of data gets captured because when you call a call center, the data of what the interaction is something that's getting captured manually. So like that, data capture is certainly has a human element to it, and I think we will continue to have that for a very long time. But data is available. So if you look at the difference between analytics from a perspective of B2B, B2C, because I've sat on both sides, I would say that in the case of B2B, I would put it as an equation which is 1:10:100. The kind of interaction or the quantum of interaction the client has in the early stage, that is pre-order stage, let's assume it is 1 unit. Then the kind of interaction that the client would have with your organization during the development phase, because there is a discovery phase when whether your service organization or whether you're manufacturing a generator or anything else, industrial product or a service, there is a phase where you collaborate with the client to create the required output for the client, right? So during that phase, there are 10 units of interaction. But after the delivery happens, subsequently AMC, service, or those kind of interactions, they are 100 units in the case of B2B. In the case of a B2C, it may not be that much. Sometimes it may even be reversed. Like think about, how often do you speak to the guy who actually sold you an insurance? Or how often do you call an insurance call center? You don't call them every day. You call them maybe once or twice, when we have a need to reimburse, or, when there is an accident claim, and things like that. But in the case of a B2B, it's exactly the reverse. The moment two organizations sign an SOW, the quantum of interaction drastically increases. So the kind of analytics which is really helpful is about how you manage those interactions. You find out what insights you can gain from why you are interacting with the client, what proportion of those interactions can be automated, what proportion of those interactions can be eliminated if you find out as to why those interactions start. So interactions largely are grouped into 3 or 4 buckets. Sometimes it's about inquiries. Can you change the order volume for a purchase order we have released, something like that, right? Sometimes it's a complaint, sometimes it's a request, and sometimes it's an escalation. So broadly, it falls into these 4 buckets. And depending on each of these buckets, if we are able to use analytics to predict what's likely to be the kind of requests or the inquiries which are going to come in, we would be able to proactively avoid them or address them as far as possible in an automated manner. So this actually then what happens is this drives the sales cycle. To answer your question now, if the interaction with the client is good, automatically what happens is, in B2B, there are 2 kinds of sales process. One is the typical sales process of lead gen, where you try to prospect and try to, convert that opportunity. So the other is about the RFQ process. A lot of organizations actually bid, and they are served the RFQ, they bid and they get the orders. So in these 2 scenarios, which are slightly very different, what plays a significant role is how you get selected as the preferred vendor. And that's largely about the experience that they have with you when they did business earlier. And if we are able to establish a good credibility about our processes, about our people, and about the experience they had with us, then we would become a preferred vendor, we would become a strategic partner to them. And so that's how I see the role of analytics helping in the B2B from a sales funnel perspective. The classical sales funnel that we normally see, the kind of analysis that we could do in the sales side is more in the B2C. When you look at that classical funnel of saying, how many inquiries have come, what's the kind of inventory that we have, and how many partners do we have, and that kind of network. Here it's as I said, a little bit different.
Got it. So so it essentially you're saying in the B2B space. So that's very interesting. What you're saying is in the B2B space, the level of data exhaust or creation that is there could be at a particular level till the order is received, when possibly the client is working in a hunting mode type of stuff. And then once they get it and then they start forming the account, then you're saying the interaction level actually goes up, as opposed to a B2C space where you're saying that a lot of that exploration, discovery, data creation happens possibly till the sale happens, and after that it may not be at that level of proportion. Very nice. I never thought of that that way. Excellent. So when I went through your profile, right, like you also mentioned, you started off as an engineer working in the manufacturing space. Then you got into the banking sector, where you worked with 3 large multinational banks. Again, on the commercial banking side of it, like you mentioned. And then now, the last 13 years that you've been running your own consulting organization, you are now focusing predominantly on the B2B space, which includes financial services, which also includes manufacturing, other similar sectors, right? So just keen to know, how do you go about building this, domain knowledge? Because again, so 2 questions. Number 1, how important is industry domain knowledge and situational awareness important for being able to contribute effectively to a client situation or a problem or any assignment that one picks up, right? And 2 is, if it is necessary, how does one go about building it? And specifically this question because you're running a consulting practice, so when you go and pitch to a client and then get the business, right? If it's a new industry, do you even pick them up? And if you pick them up, how do you go about building that capability where you're able to lead them in thought?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, very, very good question. And see, I think it's largely about, I would say, a personal quality. It's largely about, your ability to, self-initiative, I think, is the fountain of success when it comes to building domain capability. And the second is curiosity. I think these 2 actually technically, these are personal qualities that drive success when we want to get into multiple domains or when we want to understand a new domain. Fundamentally, I think all businesses are very similar. I mean, if you look at the fundamental elements of any business, they are very similar. And likewise, if you look at all human beings, they are alike. Whether it's a person of authority and position and power versus a person who is there at a very bottom level in the society, they are ultimately human beings. Their behaviors and attitudes are driven by certain aspirations. So likewise, businesses or individuals, if we are able to break it down into the fundamental elements and then study it upwards, I think we will be able to get into any domain. But to answer your question, right? I mean, if I'm going to walk into a sector, I've walked into sectors like shipping. I've walked into sectors like oil and gas, into sectors like consumer-driven telecom, B2B telecom. Sectors like this for which I had no experience prior, and I walked into those sectors. Luckily, in those sectors, I mean, I'm very transparent with the client that I don't understand the sector. But at the same time, I let the client know that I'm not trying to bring in your domain knowledge. You guys know it better, and I think that's always the case. It's like a doctor, right? I mean, the doctor can recommend to you, what treatment or what is the remediation for a problem that we have. How we have to apply that remediation is our issue, right? I mean, he can tell you that eat so many calories, try to cut this. But what is our diet routine, what we like, what we dislike, I think that the doctor cannot guide. So I'm very frank with the clients when it comes to domain. But I think there are certain roles when you're an outsider, there are certain roles that the clients want you to play. And mostly the clients understand their domain expertise more than a functional consultant like mine. Versus industry experts. When you look at larger consulting firms, they have a industrial arm, industrial practice, they have a shared service practice, and they have a media practice. So there they expect the subject matter experts to bring in what's happening in the industry. But when they look at functional experts like me, or to some extent from people like you, they are going to see what you bring in as an analytics expert, and what you bring in as a process expert, and are you able to see their problem through the lens that you already have and solve that problem. I think that's the critical element that I think is important for success.
Got it. So, can you talk us through a few examples of, so you spoke of oil and gas, you spoke of manufacturing, you spoke of, financial banks or commercial banking. Okay. Can you talk of, and then obviously the whole progress that has happened in the AI space from 13 years back, where we used to do Six Sigma was predominantly descriptive analytics, being able to, do some sort of a regression correlation, and then say, you look at the most important axis and solve for it, right? Where the focus was more on the cost part of it. And then with big data coming in, a lot of model building happened. There was a lot of opaqueness, but possibly the level of accuracy of whatever the black box predictors seem to be better, right? Right. Just wanted to understand two things. I mean, just with some examples of the type of work where you had to use analytics and AI with business examples in any of the couple of industries that you worked on. And how has this evolved given the level of data exhaust and, all the type of latest in terms of algorithms and all that are coming into play?
Absolutely. So if you look at the kind of work that I've done, I've worked largely in in the HR space, knowingly or unknowingly. Like another domain that I got into was HR. When analytics was coming in, when analytics was coming into HR, so people wanted to know, how can we apply that in HR? And so because I had some expertise in analytics, I've been building models since the early days, as you rightly said, Six Sigma days and all that stuff. I got into HR. So I've been now, in the past, say around 10 years or so, I've been working with a variety of organizations. So we build predictive models on employee attrition, ability to predict who can likely to get promoted, clustering models to identify competencies and group employees, so that we know what could be, so building statistical competency models instead of just putting competency models together based on qualitative data. NLP, I've done a lot of work on training feedback, building models where we can, because a large part of the data that we have from a training feedback form, for example, is only processed when it is numerical in nature. Qualitative data, the things that people write, is generally not captured in training. And and training is a huge investment for most organizations, right? I mean, they spend a substantial part of their employee budgets other than salary on training. And so what is the kind of return that they get? What are the problems that can be fixed from the feedback that the employees give? That's an area. Similarly, on a telecom space, I've built predictive models for customer churn. And when I've built such models, I've always tried to keep the model simple. Instead of one of the organizations that I was associated with, clients, they had built a massive model which had some 35 or 37 parameters, and by the time a possible customer could come into the model, it would take 3 months, because some data you have to wait to capture and things. And but in telecom space, most customers leave before 3 months. The prepaid customers and all that stuff. So I suggested them that don't use a global model, but use a local model, which means try to take a geography and try to take a customer segment. So choose a geography where you have the biggest pain point in terms of attrition, and choose a customer segment where you have the highest attrition, or where it's hurting your business the most, and build a predictive model for that alone. And so when we did models like that, the models were more accurate. And the FN scores were better. The model was able to predict better. So then they were also able to concretely, the explainability part of analytics is always very critical, right? So there is a wow moment the moment an expert from outside who does not know your industry comes and predicts and says that this is the likely person to attrite, and that person does attrite. So people say, yeah, analytics is magic. But after that, people start pondering. After a while, they start pondering, how do I retain this guy now? Can this analytics tell me, why this guy is attriting? And so the why bit of analytics has always been a black box. When we use certain models like till a regression, logistic regression, there is some kind of weight, and you know what the weight is. But the moment it goes beyond that, it's a load file, and you don't know what is the constituent. So if we are able to, one of the ways I tries to offset this complexity is to build a local model. Thereby, a quick turnaround comes in terms of what the client is looking for, and it also brings in the element of explainability. But if, on the other hand, the client says, no, I want a global model, then we need to look at other tools available today, like Lime and other things, where you are able to bring in the explainability. So even in oil and gas, for example, whether it could be from a customer perspective, or sometimes even from an operations perspective, can you predict which equipment is likely to fail based on the sensor data? And if you are able to also say why is it likely to fail, because the guys in the engineering side always want to know why bit. In the service sector, sometimes people don't go into that why bit a lot. They say a customer is attriting, okay, he's attriting, let's give him an offer and retain him, right? But in engineering, if you say a sensor is actually giving the signal, he'll say why it is giving, all my parameters are correct. Is it a problem with the sensor? So I think that's where analytics comes into play. HR, particularly HR analytics, has a lot of scope of how in recruitment analytics particularly, a lot of work is happening, because recruitment is a high volume business. If you look at India has a growing population. Almost every sector in India is growing now, and it's not very uncommon to see companies which are going at 30% year on year. And we also see that in some sectors, or in sectors which 10-20 years ago, attrition of 20-25% was unheard of. Even in those sectors, we have 20% attrition. The retail industry has around 140 to 100% attrition in the frontline staff, right? 140 to 150% attrition. So So the point now is with so much of new people being hired, see the quantum of work in terms of how many CVs have to be screened, how many people have to be interviewed, how many job offers have to be prepared, right? So here is where analytics comes in. So a lot of quantum of work and automation can bring in consistency. It can also bring in cost reduction for organizations. So analytics plays a big role in HR, particularly in recruitment space nowadays. I always tell the clients, which I work with in the manufacturing side, specifically the B2B side, is that don't imagine that you're in the manufacturing sector or you're in the automotive, you're selling so and so product. Product companies don't exist. No one sells products. Everyone sells services, right? Ultimately, people are now buying anything that we are buying, any physical product we are buying for the experience, for the service, right? We want to get a job done. So don't imagine that someone is coming to you because you have this capacity, installed capacity of this equipment, and you have this unique expertise in machining this component and stuff like that. Those days are gone. People come here because it's easy to do business with you. So always try to look at the interactions that you have with the clients, analyze that data, and that can give you a lot of insights.
No, absolutely agree. Absolutely. So, in the manufacturing space, obviously now with the, advent of IoT around 10, 15 years back, right? And I think that is one industry which is actually adopted IoT far more because the use cases are far higher, right? Be it from a, like you said, from a life of equipment perspective, when it is likely to fail, if equipment effectiveness perspective, vibration engineering and all that. Any use cases of that? Because there it must be generating, massive amounts of data, right? There is one area where, the data exhaust would be huge.
Yes. See, a lot of data, because, a lot of sensors have been installed in the past over the years in traditional manufacturing, for the sake of mistake proofing and for QC methods and all that stuff. Over the years, a lot of sensors have been installed, and so people have found out that yes, I mean these devices can be upgraded into IoT, and so they are now we have a lot of sensors everywhere across any equipment. Even a smaller machine has multiple sensors. Safety is one area where largely analytics comes very handy. The challenge now is how do we make this as a closed loop system? System integration. That's the key challenge here. For example, if there is a steel mill which is rolling steel sheets, and let's say the roller starts developing some cracks in it, mild and not cracks that are not visible to the human eye, but when it's rolling the steel, it might put some imprint, which are not visible for the QC person, or the QC system cannot sense it, so it's an early warning sign. So such things can be captured if we are able to do analytics, predictive analytics. So we can predict beforehand that in the next 1 hour this roller needs to be changed. So that can help us to schedule our preventive maintenance and change the rollers. Typically what would happen is they would wait for the first sign of a problem and then they would try to react to it. Like it's about walking out, and when after it starts raining, we opening the umbrella or looking for a shelter, versus proactively knowing from Google that it's going to rain between 10 to 12 when carrying an umbrella, or not going out of the home. I think that kind of an approach is very common in the manufacturing space. The other area where you see a lot of use cases is in the energy space now. A lot of you see plant and machinery related costs is more about the energy costs, and there's a lot of pressure because of ESG and other areas, other reasons that people want to reduce the cost and also reduce the carbon footprint. So a lot of analytics has been, especially AI ML analytics tools have been put in place to reduce the energy consumption and stuff like that. So that's also an area where today you see a lot of use cases. There are tools, products, systems available which can be configured to reduce the cost. Like many of them work on reducing the variability in the process. If, for example, you have to supply air pressure at a specific level across your plant, normally, the air pressure is a gradient. It's very high at one point and it comes down to the end of the plant, it's much lesser. and then the variation across the day, that also changes, right? So you can have sensors which can help us to reduce this variation, reduce the wastage consumption. So the compressor and the power cost will be optimized. So a lot of such use cases are now there in the manufacturing side.
Okay, so we spoke of, getting insights through, the Lean Six Sigma days of descriptive analytics and figuring out the why or whatever it is. And then the predictive model we spoke about. And, if you're talking analytics and AI today and you don't talk generative AI, then, it's all incomplete. Right? So just your feel of, obviously early days of generative AI, but in the B2B space and the manufacturing space, right? Where do you see application of generative AI? I mean, have you come across real life use cases already, or or where do you see which other areas in the manufacturing, oil and gas, energy, utility services do you see this happening?
I think, see, the application is huge, and as we also discussed earlier, a lot of data is not getting captured today. Interactions are not getting captured today. Starting from in B2B, minutes of meeting is very important. When you discuss with your client, you need to prepare a minutes of meeting and send out, right? I mean, there are certain agreements, very important aspects which are concluded in a meeting. So generative AI can help us in generating, a minutes of the meeting. And likewise, requests. Many people don't even have the concept of a call center in B2B. So to say, a client has to call multiple people in your organization when he has to get a job done. If there are two, services he has taken from you, and one is still in the delivery project stage, and another is already deployed, and he has issues with both of them, he has to call two different people in your organization. So then the information gets lost within the system. So generative AI can play a big role in capturing that and converting that into textual information, which can then subsequently be pushed to the right escalation points. So a lot of use cases or a lot of opportunities, I would say, does exist. Minutes of meeting is one of the early use cases or applications of this, but still in the nascent form. And other than that, I think the marketing space has a lot of application. B2B marketing has a lot of application for generative AI, because a lot of content gets churned. And in B2B, relevant content, context specific content needs to be generated. It's not mass market. So, you produce more content for less people in B2B. So if you run a normal campaign in B2C, you might run one campaign, but here you need to run 10 campaigns for maybe 7 clients, right? So it becomes a little high volume activity in the marketing space, and most marketing organizations in the B2B are not scaled up. Though social media and the digital marketing and all has come up, the size of the B2B marketing team is not that big in many organizations. They still call it business development, sales and marketing is combined. So I think there we have a lot of opportunity where generative AI can play a role.
We started off the manufacturing side, then went into the bank part of it, right? Predominantly on the process engineering side, if you will, right? Lean Six Sigma, Master Black Belt and all that. And then you got into the analytics part of it, right? And also you're a manufacturing engineer, or rather production technologist, and then a manufacturing engineer. Someone like me who's a mechanical engineer, right? And then I see that you are, you are into analytics. I see that you have built capability on, individual capability on Python and, all other tools and all that. So how do you go about building it? Because for a lot of people who have, who are in the space where they have come through the process engineering route, or who are predominantly analysts who can analyze data and are statistically reasonably sound, right? Really getting into the writing a program using Python, R and all that is a bit of a mind shift change that is required, right? Absolutely. Because it is still, if you look at most of the organizations, if you look at global capability centers in India, you will be very surprised that most of the people who are on the AI side are people who are, it is almost rolled up under the tech world today, right? So knowing programming has become is almost equal, if not more important, than knowing the basics of what you are trying to solve, right? Okay. And unfortunately, I see more and more of that shifting, the AI going more into I know programming, I know data engineering, as opposed to I know the context and how to solve for it, right? So your one person has come from the context side and now build the tech capability part of it, right? So just talk me through how did you develop an interest? How easy or tough was it? So today, if a 40-year-old or a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old wants saying, I understand everything, but I've never written a line of code, you know. So what does it require? What does it require from a mindset shift? What does it require from being dogged about it? What is it?
I mean, see, it's a good question. See, ultimately, I think good news is that, while, when you want to get into the data engineering and into the hardcore analytics team, and then I think, programming is needed. But the way things are moving is, if you want to be a service provider and all, no code analytics and things like that, and generative AI and all are going to, augment the need for actually programming skills, but nothing can substitute your ability to create something of your own from scratch. Then that shows your ingenuity. So certainly, if you look at my journey, many years ago, I think 93, I did some computer course in NIT. 93, right? When I was doing my graduation, also I did Cobalt, Fortran, and those kind of things. C, that time C++ not, this was C, and also some programming, that logic mindset I certainly had, some codes I'd written and stuff like that, right? So then over the years I've been using. So it's more about rather than being a consumer of digital tools, can you become a creator of digital tools? And the moment you start dealing with larger data sets, then your tools like whether your Excel or Access or your Minitab and JMP and all that start stalling. Minitab can take some amount of data, but then JMP it can take a little more data, but then SPSS also similar. So then you need to go into tools which have more capacity to handle data, and at least till very recently such tools were only Python, R, and things like that. You need to go into programming. So that's how I said, okay, if the world is moving in this direction and it's time for you to kind of go back to the drawing board and start learning. So I learned coding the hard way. I mean, I just said, okay, let's start learning. So I registered for some courses and I did programming. So good news is that if you have good logic sense and if you have common sense also, between these two, you would be able to bridge the gap. So that's how I went about. I was able to build small models for regression, for models for predicting or classifying tickets in the IT world, support tickets and stuff like that. So small models always, but I'll tell you, engineering side, data engineering side is always, productionizing is always a concern. If you are not a hardcore IT guy, you can still play the good role of a data scientist and also a data analyst, but it's very difficult for you to productionize whatever you have created and deploy it. So the deployment skill only comes in if you're a hardcore IT guy. So I think people should also understand the limitations, but of what you can do when you start learning programming. But it's good to know a little more than what is needed for you as a analyst or as a functional head or a analyst leader, analytics leader. Because not merely knowing your stuff is important. It's also it's a good thing to understand the pain point of the guy who's your customer. Because the guy who is going to deploy the algorithm you are giving is actually your customer, right? Not the end customer. So you need to know what his pain points are. So I think it's always good to learn stuff, learn it the hard way. Time is needed, effort is needed. There's no shortcut to it. And I think also for younger generation, they need to go beyond the concept of just getting the F1 scores or accuracy and saying that my model is working well. And today people, just try to take, one algorithm or the other, pick and drop something or the other to see, which one produces the output. And something gets a very high score, 99%, they say, okay, job done, right? So that kind of work cannot work. People need to go back to understanding, what is the business problem we are trying to solve. So formulation of the problem is very important. And it's also about going deeper to understand why this analytics is needed. I think that's where the guys who come from the software or from the analytics background, the younger generation, need to learn about the domain. And the guys like me who have good domain advantage but lack the programming skills need to learn it the hard way. And now there are a lot of no code tools like Nime and the others where you can even build AI models, NLP. You could do anything that you want without putting your hand on Python. So I think that way you can kind of improve your knowledge so that you can at least make sense to the IT guys, to the tech guys.
Excellent. In fact, that was my the last question that I was coming to. One part of it you answered. So, what would be your advice in terms of the top 2 or 3 capabilities and skills that an aspiring data scientist or a transformation engineer needs to build?
See, I would say that choose a domain to start with. You need to choose which domain. All of us did that. We knowingly, unknowingly, all of us do get into some domain or the other. I'm sure all of us were not born thinking that we'll go and work for this domain, right? But things shaped up. So pick and choose a domain that you want to work for, and develop a deeper business knowledge about that domain. Go beyond just sitting in your shared service center or office and just creating those analytics dashboards or creating those algorithms. Go beyond that, travel, find out, interact with the clients, interact with the various decision makers, understand what drives that business. I think you should see yourself as a business person and not as a data scientist. Assume yourself to be running the business and see what are the challenges, and then you would know what kind of analytics can help there. So I think that's the first thing. We don't need to tell people to learn new algorithms and new technology. I'm sure they are going to learn that. They know it's important. Also, it's important in today's world to keep up with emerging trends in technology, because newer and newer things are coming up. Now, NLP has then been there for a while. AI has been there for many years with very limited use cases. But now there are more use cases in the last 10 years or so. But then suddenly when ChatGPT came is when many people realized what is AI. Till that, AI was only a picture of a metal robo. That kind of beautiful image of a robo moving around and stuff like that. When generative AI came and ChatGPT came and people said, "Oh, is this what AI is?" Right? So I think people need to up there, and I'm sure this was actually a shock for many people from the IT, also from the data scientists, also for many of them. They must have been very surprised to see the model. So I think keep up with the trends. New things keep coming every day. So I think these would be my top 2 advice.
Excellent. So you're saying obviously the person needs to be integrated with the business, empathize with the business, know what think like a business leader, and engage the business unit to understand more, and keep oneself updated about the emerging trends that are happening, and be agile about the whole stuff in terms of picking up and learning about it.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll just add one point, last point. In almost many jobs where I've migrated, if you see, my career, I've jumped from one step to another, one industry to another. Almost in every industry that I've worked in, employed, the business leader that I used to work for, he always offered me at some point of time a business role. He said, "Neil, you come and work for me. You become my trade finance guy. You come run my production for me in manufacturing," and so on and so forth, right? So I think it's important to, though that was not my core competency. So I think you need to get inside, get the required skill sets, do the job like what they are doing, get the certifications if the job requires you to actually prove your credentials to your peers. So I took certain exams, passed those exams for commercial banking to prove to people that yes, I know commercial banking. Then they started interacting with me, mingling with me, etc. So I think those kind of initiatives people need to take.
No, I agree. Excellent, Neil. Thank you so much for your time. Very, very interesting and enriching talking to you. Really appreciate you making time and talking to us at Expert Talks at MAAVRUS. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Mahaa. Wonderful interacting with you, and a pleasure to have had this opportunity to talk to you.